When you think of retro gaming, you probably think of the NES, as it was many people's first introduction to home console gaming. It was also the console that introduced a number of players to co-op gaming. Of course, the graphics and gameplay are simple and some might say outdated, but many of these games still hold up and considered some of the best co-op games of all time. We're going to be talking about the top 30 co-op games on the NES. Starting with the Xybots. So this is actually an unlicensed game that came out on the NES. It's an arcade port. And this one, it is a little rough around the edges, but the reason I wanted to include it is it has a split screen co-op mode where you and your friend work together to navigate the pseudo 3D environments and take out all the enemies and find the exits. This can actually be really fun. And as you move through the levels, you're able to upgrade your weapons, get maps, and buy health as well. Of course, it's not the best game on NES, but for being an unlicensed game, it's actually pretty good. And it's one that I never hear people talk about, so definitely try it out. Gyromite is one of the early games to come out on the NES in 1985. So you're supposed to actually play this with Rob the robot. One player controls the character moving through the levels. Rob would typically control the pipes. You can actually play this with a friend, which is how you should do it. And that person, they control the pipes and the other person navigates the levels. It's actually pretty fun and unique experience. And the player controlling the pipes is able to control a lot more than you might think. If they're not careful or just not a good co-op friend, they could easily kill you, but they can also kill the enemies. So finding a good co-op partner for this is essential. I just wanted to mention this game because maybe people don't know of it as a co-op game. Russian Attack is one of Konami's games that doesn't get as much attention as some of their others. It's kind of like Contra, but you have knives. This game is incredibly difficult, and I'd be lying if I said that I didn't try playing this with some cheat codes. Unlimited lives are definitely welcome here. The jumping is pretty weird. You don't do a flip, you don't tuck your knees or anything like that. They actually kind of spread out and it looks funny. It is going to take some time to get used to the mechanics here. But once you do, and when you have a good co-op partner, you're going to actually start just zooming through these levels, especially in the bosses, when you can just duck down and start stabbing repeatedly, or when you turn around and you duck down and stab at the guys coming from behind you. There's some cheap things you can do to kind of strategize and kind of cheat your way through the levels. This is definitely not one of the top tier co-op games, but it's one, again, that doesn't get as much attention as the other Konami games. A Dies is a shameless Castlevania clone. Does that mean it's not worth playing? Some might say yes. The whole reason why I put this on the list is the co-op mode. A second player is able to control the bird. I don't know why they made these controls so weird. And when you play this game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But once you get used to it, it's not terrible. I mostly hear people just say that, yeah, this is a bad Castlevania clone, and they're not wrong, but it's a pretty unique co-op experience, with one of the first assist modes I've ever seen in a co-op game, where the second player isn't exactly equal, but if you have a good partner, they're able to assist and make the levels easier to navigate and easier to fight the enemies. So this one is being included just for the unique co-op experience that it provides. Alien Syndrome. This is another unlicensed game on the NES, and it's truly one of the better ones. It's a top-down run-and-gun shooter, but it's kind of non-linear. You don't just go straight to the exit. You gotta go find and save all the people throughout the level. You have access to a little map, and you walk around the maze-like levels, shooting aliens, and trying to find all of the captives. Once you get them all, then you can go through the exit and you can fight a boss. The bosses look really impressive here, and that's one of the highlights of the game visually. One of the things I don't like is when you fight the basic enemies and as you navigate through the map, they just respawn endlessly. So there's never this feeling of clearing a world and then coming back to it and it's empty. You're gonna have to deal with these enemies over and over again until you finish. But it's just a fun game to wander around the maze and explore and work with a friend. A Nightmare on Elm Street is another game that doesn't get a lot of positive attention. Again, it's not the best game, but what makes it stand out is it's one of the only 4-player co-op games on any 8-bit console, and it might be the only 4-player platformer on any home console in the 8 or 16-bit era. That alone makes it absolutely worth talking about. And for what it's worth, it runs pretty well on the NES. Yes, there's going to be a lot of flickering, but the slowdown isn't as bad as you'd think. It's still there, but it's playable. There's a lot of cheap deaths in this game, and the enemies can be kind of annoying, and it's kind of hard to just wrap your head around the gameplay in general, as you're supposed to collect all of Freddy's bones in order to progress to the next part of the level. And you're gonna be wandering through the streets, I'm guessing that is the titular Elm Street, trying to get into the buildings, and seemingly there's just no rhyme or reason as to what buildings you're able to access and what buildings you're not able to access. But the more you play, the more you catch on, and it's actually a much better game than you might initially think. I actually really love this game, and playing it with 4 people is just a really cool novelty that you don't get to experience in most NES games. Cowboy Kid is one of those NES games that did not get very much attention when it came out, and now if you're going for physical cartridges, it's a really expensive game. So I think it went under a lot of people's radar, but it's a pretty solid co-op experience. If you ever played the Goemon games on NES, this is pretty much like the American version of that. It has some minor RPG elements. You basically walk through the town, you fight enemies, you gather money, and then you can buy upgrades. I've never been able to get too far in this game, but from what I've played, I do really enjoy it. I need to beat it someday, and I will. Balloon Fight. This is one of the earliest co-op games on the NES. This came out in 1984. It's very similar to Joust as far as gameplay goes. You tap a button to fly higher, and as you release the button, you'll slowly float down, and you want to land on top of the enemies to pop their balloons. It's a really fun and addicting co-op experience. I played this game for hours with my brother at times. It's very simple, but very addicting. And for an early NES game, I think it holds up great. Cabal is a third-person co-op arcade shooter type of game. It's actually the game that started the genre, Cabal shooters, where basically you control a character, dodge the enemy fire, moving left to right, and then you use a cursor to shoot at the various enemies. This isn't very intuitive at first, but once you get the hang of it, it actually makes a lot of sense. We made a video about Cabal shooters. It became a genre that I really love, and I want to see more of these games come back. I actually think that the NES version of this might be better than the arcade. Jackal is a top-down run-and-gun shooter, except for I guess you're not running, you're in jeeps. I love the soundtrack to this game, and I love that it's not just moving top to down. It's a little bit of left to right, going in and out of various areas. You're not necessarily exploring, but it's not as just moving to the top of the screen like some of the other vertical shoot-em-ups. You also break up the gameplay a little bit by searching for and rescuing hostages, and when you get enough, you gather more points and more lives. This is an excellent game, and if you are a collector, it's still one of the cheaper cartridges you can buy. Nothing bad to say about this game. Really solid, really fun. Rodland is a single-screen co-op platformer. This one was only released in Europe and I think Japan. It's kind of like Bobble, but you're these troll-like characters and you use your magic to attack the enemies, and that's basically it. You jump around, you can place ladders to climb up or down, and you just eliminate all the enemies and then move on to the next level. Really simple concept, and the fact that it never came out into the US, I think why it goes under a lot of people's radar. But the gameplay is really solid here, and it's one of the co-op hidden gems that more people should play. Snow Bros is another one of those single-screen arcade platform games. And if you're a collector, this is another one of those that is very expensive and hard to find. But this one also plays a lot like Bobble, but you throw snowballs. And as you throw them, they build up, and then you push the snowball and it will bounce off the walls and rotate down to the bottom of the screen, picking up all the enemies in its path. There are, I think, 100 levels in the game, and every 10 you get to a boss. And the bosses are all really unique that involve some strategy and learning of new ways to take them down. It's not as simple as just throwing your snowballs until they're dead. You gotta figure out their weakness. I didn't play this game until much later in life. It's not a game that I grew up with, but I really enjoy this game. Okay, everybody knows Tetris, but did you know that Tengen Tetris, you could actually play it cooperatively? I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of puzzle games in general, but I did play some Tetris growing up. I actually played a lot more columns because I was a Sega kid, but we're not talking about that right now. But this version of Tetris, you actually work together. You are able to each control your own blocks as they drop. Actually ends up being a real team effort, as you got to communicate in order to line the blocks up to gather up points. And if you don't work well together, obviously you're going to see those blocks stack really quick and lose. Tetris is not a game that I really thought of when it came to co-op gaming, but it works really well, making this version of Tetris the best version on the NES. And yeah, it's an unlicensed game. Is it one of the best co-op unlicensed games? I think so. Smash TV basically took what Robotron 2084 did and took it up a notch. It's a twin-stick shooter that involves just fighting hordes of enemies and gathering power-ups and moving on to the next level, gaining points and trying to beat the high score. What's interesting about this NES version is you could play it with a single controller, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around at first, as you have to hold a button and then the D-pad in a certain direction in order to lock your aim in one direction. It's hard to explain, but the best way to play this, if you have the 4-score adapter, use 4 controllers, 2 controllers for each player, and you hold the controllers vertically. And now it is a true twin-stick shooter, and you use the D-pads, one in your left hand, one in your right hand, and this controls your character and controls your aim. This is such an innovative way to make the control scheme more faithful to the arcade experience. So if you have the ability to do so, I recommend playing the game that way. It's really great in co-op. S.C.A.T is a shoot 'em up that definitely reminds me of Forgotten World, where you actually control human characters flying around. This is a later release by Natsume, and it's an incredibly difficult game to play. I use cheats on this. I'm not a real gamer, I guess. Sometimes I just want to see all the levels, alright? This game just looks great, and it plays really well too. You have a turret that is flying and rotating constantly, but you could push a button to lock it in. So if you want, you could be shooting forward while your turret shoots behind you at the same time. It adds an extra layer of strategy to a shoot 'em up. This is another one that I just didn't know about until fairly recently, in the last 5 or 10 years. It's not a game I grew up with, but I'm glad I found it now. It's kind of a hidden gem, I think, right? Lil Ninja Bros is a game that I actually had from my childhood. It's a game that mixes RPG elements with beat-em-up gameplay. It's pretty interesting. You each control a character, and it is completely equal between players. You have an overworld map, and as you walk, you get into random battles. But instead of a turn-based battle like most RPGs of the time, it goes into a top-down beat-em-up. The gameplay is similar to Culture Brain's other game, Kung Fu Heroes, which came out in 1984, where you jump around onto various enemies, you can punch them, and you can punch bricks to let out items. If you've played that, it's very similar to that gameplay. And of course, when you complete a battle, you're able to gain experience and you're able to upgrade your characters. It's quite a unique experience, and one of the only co-op RPG games of the time. Silkworm is a game that looks really basic, but I ended up enjoying it way more than I ever thought I would. It works great as a co-op game because one player flies in the air and the other drives on the ground. You're able to really work together, spread your fire across both air and land, and as a team, destroy whatever enemies or obstacles are going in front of your partner. There's also boss battles that are pretty cool. Anyways, this is a great co-op game. Mendel Palace. So this is made by Game Freak, the people that brought us Pokemon, but this came out way earlier. If you look at the characters, they actually look kind of like the Game Boy version of Ash Ketchum on Pokemon. You can kind of see that, right? This gameplay is really unique. It's a single screen, top-down action game, I guess, where you use these tiles and you pick them up and throw them against the enemies. I haven't really seen anything else like this. You're able to pick the levels that you want, so it's not exactly linear. It's more like Mega Man, where you can choose your own path. This is just a really solid co-op game that should be talked about more. Super Spike V-Ball. What am I doing putting a sports game on this list? Super Spike V-Ball is the best sports game on NES. I stand by that. I love this song. It will get stuck in my head for days, and I'm okay with that. You could play as Billy and Jimmy from Double Dragon, playing volleyball. What else do I need to tell you? And yes, it's a co-op game. You could play it 2 against 2. You could either play against 2 other humans, and this has always been a go-to multiplayer game when I have NES tournaments with my friends. We've spent hours on this game, getting way too competitive, way too loud and rowdy, but you can play through the entire tournament mode cooperatively. So you and your friend go through and fight all of the various countries together. I don't know why I said fight. You're not fighting. You're playing volleyball. It's not a fight. But the point is, you're playing it together. It can take a while to get used to the controls, but once you do, you're going to be slapping that ball around, spiking it down into your opponent's faces just like a champ. All right, this game is so addicting. I love it. Yes, it's the best sports game on NES. TMNT Arcade. All right, this is a game I definitely played a lot when I was a kid, but I sucked at it. I could not get anywhere. Then finally, as an adult, I played it with one of my friends who showed me some strategies. And yeah, the strategies are cheap. You mostly just push A and B to do the uppercut move, because that takes care of most of the standard enemies with one hit. And you just do that over and over and over throughout the whole levels. And then once you get to the bosses, you just jump and do drop kicks left to right. And you keep doing that until they're dead. And you just gotta time it right. And that's basically the strategy to beat this whole entire game. So yeah, I've actually been able to beat this game a number of times with no cheat codes, just using these simple strategies. But yeah, this is one of the best beat 'em ups on the NES. And I actually kind of prefer this one to the arcade version. It's a lot more fair. It's not made to steal all of your quarters in the arcade. Of course, the arcade version has 4-player though, so that is the one benefit to playing that one. Final Fight 3. Okay, so did you know that there's a bootleg version of Final Fight 3 on NES? And it is way better than it has any right to be. This is the Super Nintendo game, Final Fight 3, ported to NES, and it plays surprisingly well. There's some crazy amount of flickering though, so if you have any form of epilepsy, just be careful. You're probably gonna have a seizure playing this. If you can get past that, the controls are great, the action is great, the graphics are great. It does not have an original soundtrack though. It steals the music from Mighty Final Fight, but a lot of people haven't even played that, so you're not gonna know the difference anyways. This is one of the best beat 'em ups on the NES, and it's a bootleg. Okay, so yes, this is the best bootleg game probably ever. I was so impressed when I saw this. It just blew me away. So I had to include it on the list. Heavy Barrel. This is a top-down run-and-gun shooter made by Data East, and I absolutely love this game. It's kind of like the top-down parts of Contra. You just run around, destroy enemies, and then you pick up keys, and once you get enough keys, you can unlock this massive gun and just blow all the enemies away. And like most run and gun shooters, you're able to get various upgrades and shields. I think the soundtrack is great. I think the graphics are great. I love these levels where the enemies are just coming straight down towards you and you can split up with your friend and just both of you aim up and take them all out. This is one of the NES games that is really challenging. It's not one of those impossible NES games. This is a game where if you put in enough time and practice, you could probably beat it within a few tries. I have yet to beat it, but I've gotten pretty close, all right? But it's one of my favorites. Bobble is probably the first co-op game I ever played on NES. My brother and I would play this game for hours at our cousin's house. It's such a simple concept. You just blow bubbles and trap the enemies in the bubbles. You go and push the bubble with the said enemy in it, and then they die. And then you collect the fruit, and then you move to the next level. That music will get stuck in your head, and it is annoying that it is only one song in the whole damn game. But I love this game way too much to let that get in my way. All I can say is Bobble is an all-time classic. You can't go wrong with any version of it, but the NES version is the one that I played the most. Just so many fond memories of it. I just recently found out that their names are Bub and Bob, so that's where Bobble comes from, I guess. So cool. Now you know that information. Bub and Bob. Some trivia that could probably go the rest of your life without needing to know. You're welcome anyways. Crazy Creatures is another unlicensed game, and You take a look at this, you're probably thinking, this looks stupid and I never want to play it. That's how I felt, and then I played it. All you're doing is matching animals. That's it. Sometimes it's 3 of them, sometimes it's 4 of them, sometimes it's 5 or more. That's literally the whole game. And you know what? It's one of my favorite co-op games on NES. No one is more surprised to hear that than me. But when I played this game, I was so addicted to it, I couldn't stop. And playing it with a partner just intensifies it. It's surprisingly fast-paced because you just want to get these things matched up. When they match up, they disappear. And you have a limited time. Eventually, they just start disappearing. So you want to try to get them all to disappear before the time limit. So you're frantically moving around with your little cursor, getting all of these little animals, these crazy creatures, lined up before the time runs out. I can't explain why this is fun, okay? It's just fun, all right? It's really fun to play with a friend, and it's really addicting. Just take my word for it. Yes, this looks stupid, and it is stupid, but it's also fun. Shadow of the Ninja is another Natsume game, and it's kind of like Ninja Gaiden, but co-op. I don't know why, but I am a sucker for any game where you can climb on walls or climb on the ceiling. Why is that? I don't know, but you can do that in this, and it's cool, all right? And yeah, you can get different power-ups. You can get a sword, you can get shuriken, you can get this chain dart thingy. I forgot what those are called. This is another one that's really hard, but with enough practice, you could probably beat it. Yes, this is one of my favorite co-op games on the NES. One of my favorite ninja games, probably. I had no idea this game existed when I was a kid, and I was deeply obsessed with martial arts and ninjas. So yeah, I would have loved this. I wish I played it when I was a kid, but I'm glad I was able to stumble upon it as an adult. It's absolutely worth trying. Have I said that a lot? It's absolutely worth trying. That's my phrase apparently for this video. God damn it. Double Dragon 2 on the NES is definitely the best Double Dragon game on NES. And, you know, it's one of my favorite Double Dragon games ever. In this version, it takes the controls of Renegade, where the A button always punches to the right and the B button is always hitting to the left. It takes a minute to get used to, but once you wrap your head around it, it actually makes sense, because if there's enemies on both sides of you, you just push one button and you will kick that way, and push the other button and you'll punch the other way. It's an effective way of fighting. There's so many moves you can do. You could do a flying knee, you could do a jump spinning kick. It always takes me a minute to relearn how to do these moves and to pull them off, because it's all about timing. But once you do it, you feel like a true badass when you can jump knee a guy and make them fly right off the edge. It's one of the most satisfying things you can ever do in a video game. The only thing I hate about this game is the platforming. They need to just take that right out. But other than that, this is another really great beat 'em up on the NES. I've only been able to beat it without cheat codes one time, and that was with a far more experienced friend, where he did most of the heavy lifting. But you know what? I can consistently get to the level where you have to do platforming parts. Then I die, but I can get to there pretty consistently. Monster in My Pocket is another great Konami game. It's a 2D platformer action game where you're these little monsters, Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster, and a vampire, or maybe it's Dracula. And yeah, you're very small, so all the environment around you is large, and you can pick up keys and they end up being like a weapon. You just throw them at the other enemies. This is one of the NES games with a really fair difficulty level. You can pretty easily beat this game. There's also a double jump in here. That's another one of those mechanics that I just get really way too excited about, okay? The double jump is satisfying. It just makes platforming even more fun. I love the variety of levels. I love sometimes you're traversing going up, sometimes you're moving down, sometimes it's just left to right. The platforming feels solid with that double jump. The fighting is quick, the enemies go down fast, so you feel powerful. There's never really any time where you're caught up and not making progress. This is a game where you always feel like you're moving forward. This is another one that I didn't play until I was an adult. I was really excited when I found this game. It's one of my favorite NES games ever. Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers is one of the best co-op platformers of all time. It takes a pretty unique approach. Instead of jumping on your enemies like most platformers, you actually grab these barrels and crates and you throw them at the enemies. One of the strategies that I love is you can hide inside of the crate, so then if the enemy comes towards you, they automatically die. The platforming feels good in this game. For some reason, that first level I always have a hard time with, but then the levels after that, they're not as bad. This is one of the few NES games that I can beat without cheat codes. So that alone puts it higher up for me because it makes me feel, yeah, I'm good at this game. I don't know what else to say about it. This is one that probably at the top of a lot of people's list. Yes, it's one of the best co-op platformers of all time, and definitely one of the best co-op NES games. Alright, I don't know if anyone else agrees with me, but to me, Super C is the better Contra game on NES. Better than the first. The reality is, I suck at both of these games. There's no way I'm ever going to be able to beat either of them without cheat codes. They're too hard, and I'm too bad at video games. Super C is always the one that entertains me a lot more when I do put on those cheat codes and struggle my way through to the end of the game. The graphics are better, the environments are more colorful and more interesting, and the top-down parts are better than the first game. So overall, it just ends up being a more enjoyable experience. That being said, it plays exactly the same as the first Contra, so you can't go wrong with either one, alright? They're both great games, but I didn't want to include both of them. Okay, you gotta have some variety in these things. So, Contra Super C is one of the best co-op games on NES, even though I suck at it. Okay, before we get to number one, I wanted to talk about some new games on NES, homebrews that have come out in recent years that have co-op. So I didn't necessarily think that it was fair to talk about them and include them with the other games because they're new. I also just really wanted to make sure people knew about them because yeah, there's some really great games. The first game I want to talk about is called Cowlitz Second Adventure, one of the lesser known NES homebrews. It's pretty simple, it's just a single screen platformer. But you know what? The soundtrack is really great and the gameplay is really solid, even though it's simple. I've beaten this game a couple times now with a friend. I thoroughly enjoy it. If you can find this one, definitely just try it. The next game is Jay and Silent Bob's Mall Brawl. This game has so much variety in moves and level design. It's such a great NES beat 'em up. It's one of the best to ever be made. This is another one. I beat this game twice now. I really love this game. The part that I hate though is the shopping cart part, which is a clear homage to the hovercraft levels in Battletoads. And yeah, it sucks in Battletoads, and it sucks just as much in this game, so I wish that wasn't there. But this is a game that's really good, that you should try out. Now, this is a game that's not out yet. It's called Black Pearl, but there is a demo of the first level, and I will say it's a little bit rough. This game could use some polish. I love the art style, and I did enjoy the hack and slash platforming action. I'm just looking forward to the full version of this. It has some potential. But the best homebrew game on NES, to me, by far, is Micromages. This game is incredible. It might just be my favorite NES game of all time. It's a 4-player co-op platformer game that just feels so incredibly satisfying. Jumping up these walls, doing the boss fights, I can't say enough about this game. It's just impressive that this even runs on an NES. There might be some minimal slowdown, but it runs really well. If you haven't played Micromages yet, just do it. It's also on Steam, so it's easy to find if you don't have an NES. I highly recommend this game. It's pretty much the best co-op NES game ever, arguably. But I do want to get to the number one original NES game on this list, and that, of course, is River City Ransom. Yes, when it comes to the original NES game, this one is the best, and I don't know. Between this and Micromages, one of them, to me, is the best co-op NES game of all time. They're two very different games, but I'm going to talk about River City Ransom right now. You probably all know this game. The reason why I put it at number one is simply because it offers so much in an old school 8-bit game. It has the 2D beat 'em up action, but there's also some exploration. You're going around trying to find each boss. You're gathering money. You're powering yourself up. You're getting stronger. You're learning new moves. You're going to the different towns. You're trying out mini games. You're getting in the spa to show off your butt. River City Ransom is just such a solid experience. It's rare that a game that came out in the 80s holds up so well. And one of the things I love about this game is it's not extremely difficult. If you die, you just lose some money, and then you can just regain that money. And it's not that hard to gather money up fast and buy power-ups. When I finally figure out how to actually play this game, I just started enjoying it even more. All I have to say is start the game by gathering a bunch of money and then buy some power-ups. Get the one where you can punch fast and you can kick fast. Once you do that, you can take out any enemy, and then all you have to do is find each boss. And you don't have to fight them in any particular order, you just go and fight them all. Then the high school opens up, and you get into the high school, and then you fight Billy and Jimmy from Double Dragon. And then from there, you go to the roof and you fight the boss. And then you beat the game. It's honestly, once you learn how to play this game, it's one of the most accessible games on the NES. Anyone can play it and beat it, I think. It doesn't take a lot of skill. It just takes some patience and some understanding. You can't say that about most NES games. A lot of them are just going to take tons of practice just getting good. This one isn't like that. River City Ransom is just the perfect pick up and play game, and you can beat the whole game in under an hour. And I love having that kind of experience when you don't have a lot of time with one of your friends. This is truly just, to me, one of the best beat 'em ups of all time and one of the best co-op games of all time. I know I'm not saying anything new about this game. I'm just speaking from the heart, okay? And I'm a man that loves River City Ransom, all right? It'll bring a goddamn tear to my eye when I talk about this game and when I fight Billy and Jimmy and I hear that Double Dragon theme song. Yes, I shed tears of joy. Yeah. Anyways, there are... Anyways, so, yeah, that's 30 co-op NES games. What's your favorite co-op NES game? If you enjoyed this video, hey, I already talked about co-op homebrews that have come out in recent years. Guess what? I have a video all about that. I talk about co-op NES homebrews, all new games. So yeah, click here to watch that video. Thank you for watching.